Welcome to Powered by Instinct, a podcast for professionals who think about how your fundamental nature drives performance. In each episode, Kolbe experts will interview top performers, team leaders, consultants, and coaches to discuss identifying team members' strengths, aligning those strengths with their jobs, and optimizing individual and team performance. If you're interested in getting more done more naturally, then let's jump in.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here. Powered by Instinct. Happy to be doing another show, and we have another great guest. Shelley Moore, welcome to the show, to podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Shelley has been a Kolbe Certified Consultant since 1998. So you have a wealth of experience. So I really think everybody's going to enjoy being able to hear from you, because they hear from us pretty often, but I think it's great to have you on to talk about how you've used Kolbe with your clients. How did you first get involved with Kolbe? That way back in 1998, or actually a little before that, but
it was a little before that. I was thinking about that when I saw the question, and it's like, gosh, is this really like my 25th year? It's like, I think it might be, but it's one of those things where I worked at a food manufacturing company for about 4.5 years before I started my business. And of course, let's see, I would have been like 28 or 29 when I started my business. So I really had no business doing that, by the way, but I thought it was a great idea and I stuck with it. But I worked at a food manufacturing company. We had a consultant come in who was doing strategic planning with us. And I was a part of the executive team, and she introduced us to Kolbe. And at the time, I remember it was all done manually.
Yep.
And she introduced us to it, and it was a critical part to our success. And it was a family business, a lot of different dynamics going on. And so when I decided I was going to do my own thing, Kolbe was coming along with me, because in all the team building and everything I had to do for that, it just was a game changer. And I've stuck with it ever since.
So one of the reasons we're having you on the show today is we've been talking with you about a particular engagement you have had really over a number of years, but then a particular engagement with Damon Products, a company that you've been working with for a long time. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about what they do and how you started to get involved with them, and then we'll talk specifically about their leadership team.
Yeah, certainly. Over 10 years ago, a local college here, Goshen College is the name of it, they had a family business group of CEOs. It was a CEO peer group that they had for a number of years. And it was a group of people that had been together meeting monthly for like over 15 years. And they had decided they didn't really want to do that anymore, and kind of transitioned the group over to me. And that's how I met Larry Davis, the CEO of Damon Products. And through that process, I used a case study approach. And one of the issues he was frustrated with was the fact that he's an innovator. So he is a quick start, and one of the only insistent quick starts pretty much across the whole middle management team. They make manifolds, which are a critical part to any kind of heavy equipment and machinery. It's a very technically advanced engineering type project or product. So they've got custom and standards, and he was really wanting them to get more into innovative product development, which would be like product line extensions and so forth from many of the things that they had done. However, he felt as he injected these new ideas into his middle management team, they had a pretty flat organization. They went dead and they really didn't go anywhere. So as I introduced the CEO group to Kolbe, and they learned amongst themselves about how it related to them, he wanted me to do that, of course, with his team, and also started that off with really a creative team process is what we call it, which is a stage gate product development process. And that in of itself really helped, because while they wanted to fact find and do all these things with these products and then never get them launched, especially if they were new, the stage gate really helped us identify like what would be the primary modes of operation that you would have. So up front, it is important to, do a lot of the research of the market needs and those types of things. But as you progress, you really need to get to the point where you're selling and promoting and being able to just try it, just experiment with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. And so he was really relieved by that. And, as a result, we've been able to, over the last few years with that particular process, launch a variety of products that have really increased their sales quite significantly. In fact, we've surpassed really what the expectation was, because of course they set a very low goal for the percentage of sales that they would have, being as conservative as they were. But yeah, it really just started out his frustration of, not having enough innovation, enough quick start to try things.
So tell me a little bit what that looked like for him back before you started working on this problem. I mean, partly because I think for a lot of people, they think, well, hey, he's the CEO. He can just make it happen. He can just tell people this is what we're going to do. So why didn't he just do that?
Well, I think he did try to do that, of course, but it would just be that, oh, yeah, we'll look into that. We'll look into it, meaning we'll research it. And the thing is, it never really made the priority list, because you're talking about a group of they're almost all fact finder, follow through, preventative quick starts. So, they would get tied up in the day-to-day customer needs, the things that they were used to doing, the routines that they had. And there just ended up never being time to create this other space for experimentation. And so they never did get back with him. It never really did go anywhere. So he was just at a point where he just didn't find that to be acceptable. And I think as, they started to really just develop a sales team as well. And their lead still to this day, Gordon, he is a systems analyst and a 1 or a 2 quick start. And he's a head of sales, and then we're really their marketing department. So there's not that innovative piece within their organizational structure. And so we had to kind of supplement that and build that in to be able to make it a priority and have the regular meetings and really teach them how innovation can work and how we can actually systematize, innovation and new ideas in a way that they can accept it. And then as we did that, it was slow at the get-go, but as we did, they were able to see they could be successful. And then we were able to really now speed up the rate because we were able to systematize the way that they would go about it.
So tell me a little bit more about the way you did it. You said, as we went about it and became successful, what did that look like when you were doing it with them?
So initially, I have a process that's called the Passion Primer. It's a leadership development process, and Kolbe is a big part of it, but I really focus on the 3 parts of the mind. So the workbook I've developed in and of itself starts off with the 3 parts of the mind. And so I do things like the DISC, the Profile XT, some other assessments that touch upon the relating styles, but really it comes down to understanding the fact that as a group, the synergy was out of whack, of course, as I mentioned before. So he wanted me to sit down with each person individually and go through the Passion Primer process. And that's them taking the assessments and meeting with me on an individual basis 3 times. The first one is to understand their interpretation of their results. Then I give them activities. They have to complete those activities. It really becomes their leadership development plan for the goals they want to set to overcome the things that they learned about themselves just purely through self-awareness and how they operate, but also how they relate, and also what some of their cognitive skill sets are, such as conflict resolution is a big one. When you have a very passive group of people that aren't knowing how to deal with conflict, on top of being preventative quick starts, and on top of being very, conscientious and, perfectionists about what they do, it of itself becomes a real roadblock. So when we were able to individually, as I did that with each person over, and that took a couple months to get through that process with all of them individually, then pulled them together as a team, and they had to share their results with one another. And we looked at the synergy and more the comprehensive reports, and then have them assess for themselves that, well, what did you learn about yourselves? And how does this show up in your productivity day in and day out? And they were able to process it and see it for themselves, being as analytical as they are, that this is, it's clear. Yeah, it's clear why we don't innovate well or why we don't accept it, but that doesn't make it acceptable. And they were able to learn that process for themselves. So when we went into the creative team stage gate product development process, they went into it with knowing the problem they needed to solve for themselves because of how they operate. And then as they learned that process, and we actually started to take products through it, then they knew when they were getting stuck because they weren't creating the sense of urgency that was needed. And me being a 9571, I, along with Larry and a couple other people in the organization, would inject, that sense of urgency and the spirit of experimentation to say, this is good, this is great, we're going to pick up the ball and take it to this point, but now we need you to engage and do what you do. And then the collaborative aspect of everybody working together with different modes of operation and knowing how to do that started to really take hold. And there became less of an attitude about it and just more of an appreciation about how energy works and how you get things done. And, as a result, still work with them today. And it's a very similar approach I do with most of my clients. When people see it for themselves and they really can take what they learn through assessments in general and indexes, which the Kolbe is the primary one I really focus on, then it makes sense. They have that language. They have that vernacular to be able to say, oh, we're stuck in this meeting because we're fact finding ourselves to death. And that really, helps them move along and solve their own problems over time.
So as you were going through that, were there breakthrough moments, or was it more of an evolution where things kind of changed slowly?
Well, there was an initial breakthrough moment. Their first product was a flange, and we won't get into all the technical details of that, but it was a flange. And they thought that for sure that when they sold manifolds, we kind of cracked the joke, or at least I did, would you like a flange with that? Whenever you place the order of the manifold. And they thought for sure, that's all they needed to do because their customers believed in them so much. And yet, when we did the research, actual market research, because anything marketing and sales related, like market research and those types of things, were all new to them. Even though that's fact finding, they still didn't know that you actually go out into the marketplace versus what I call navel gazing, just looking at.
Because they were so production oriented, or?
Yes. Yeah. Production and manufacturing, distributor services, customer service oriented, orders just kind of come to them, And so when we were able to do that market research and they came back and said, no, we got all these other suppliers, and they realized they were overseas producers and all these things they would never be able to compete with in terms of getting materials and pricing and all of that, then it was like, they were like, oh my gosh, here we are. We've been navel gazing, looking at ourselves, looking at our own processes, demonizing things, as they would call it. And then they were like, we shouldn't even be doing this. Because we went out into the market and we actually had dialogues and understood people and took more of a promotional approach to what the ideas that we were having, it was just really not a good idea. And so when they realized that, it was like everybody agreed instantaneously, let's move on to the next one. And I think when that happened, it clicked because they realized they were just getting mired into their own fact finding and follow through on their own beliefs. And it wasn't getting them to where they needed to be.
So how did you get those preventive quick starts? So for those less familiar with all of our lingo, the people who stabilize. I mean, you described this group as being way more the fact finders gathering and sharing information, and the follow through systematizing and organizing. But how did you get those people who were, sounds like a number of them must have also been preventive quick starts. How did you get them to kind of get out of the way of the innovation? Or did you get them to actually push it? I mean, that would surprise me, but.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say they pushed it. They didn't really get to the point of pushing it, I would say, till probably 3-4 years later, when they really started to see that the quick starts and the fact finding follow through working together actually produce better results. Then all of a sudden it's like they own the process, which is great. Really, it was, we identified who those accommodating and initiating quick starts were, and then took the stage gate process. And I actually helped them work through who should be the people, like, what is this stage gate about? It's about research. Okay, so fact finders are great, but you're also having to go out and experiment with the marketplace, and you're having to come up with new ideas as you're gathering information. So we would identify based on MOs, just like the life cycle. We've talked about at Kolbe over the years, like initially, when you're in the startup stage, you may be fact finding. The growth stage is kind of quick start. When you get into the part where you're kind of flatlining a little bit and not growing, you are really looking at, maybe the follow through aspects, versus whenever you're having to reinvent yourselves, you kind of got to look at where things are at and implement and kind of recycle through the whole wheel again. So we did the same thing with the stage gate process. and really said what should be the primary modes of operation in that stage, and then who are the people that are going to be able to provide that naturally versus forcing people to work against the grain.
So then how did you recruit other quick starts? Because you were saying before there weren't enough, or maybe you didn't. I mean, you mentioned you, so maybe it was you and your team became more part of that. So was it recruiting more, or was it empowering the ones who are already there, and keeping the other ones from saying no?
It was empowering primarily the accommodating quick starts and people like Larry and myself for sure. But then we ended up broadening the group. So we started off with a group of 5, 6, 8 people. But then as we got further into the process, we realized we need access to more of that energy. And so we broadened it to another really layer of people. And I think still to this day, there's probably now 12 to 13 people that, are a part of that process. And then they are taking on projects for themselves based on interest and kind of their knowledge base. But then when they own a project, they have the freedom to go outside the organization to their distributor network or to other people inside the organization to help them with their project and to be cognizant of those other types of energies that they need to be successful with it. So some of that was kind of teaching them how to lead projects and how to not just be someone who's, say, out on the plant floor running a line, but now you're actually leading a team for implementing a project. Now, that requires understanding a lot of these things and knowing who to bring in when to be successful.
So what do you think you had to do with the CEO and that leadership team kind of before this project to gain their trust so that they would listen to you and you could make all the progress you did in that project? Or were you able to just kind of jump right into that?
Well, with the CEO, I think being the CEO peer group and having worked with him for a couple years prior, where he was working through a transition, it was his family-owned business. He was working through the transition of his father getting out of the business, and the group and myself were helpful in advising him. There was just a really close, I think, trust based upon that process, and being in an intimate group like that and them being able, facilitating their open dialogue with one another about their issues, whether it was family business related, personal related, or the skill sets and leadership issues that they faced in their businesses. And that went a long way, because we had that, I'm going to say a couple years before he really started to engage me with the rest of the organization. And even when he did, there was speculation about whether or not I would be accepted, because it is such a tight-knit, insular organization. And Dave, the CFO, was probably the first person. He was the CFO at the time. Now he's the president. And, that was the one where it's like, yeah, well, we'll see what Dave thinks kind of thing. But, I think some of it's just my own style. I'm a straight shooter. I'm very direct. I'm able to go in and say, can I help or not help? And do my fact finding and quick starting that I do, and rearranging things a little bit as I do, and listen and really relate to how Dave and Larry both were seeing the business, which they did see it a little bit differently between them. But as I was introduced to be able to build that relationship, that to me is just the one-on-one intimacy that you have in developing that trust. And then to me, I always work primarily with CEOs first and then executive teams. And I build the trust at that level before I really look to go deeper into the organization, because we've got to be able to have those types of discussions and dialogues. And oftentimes I'm telling them things that nobody else will. And so it's one of those things where I've got to do that the right way and handle it the right way, so I don't upset other people and keep everybody engaged in the process.
Yeah. So before we leave kind of that new product development project and team, what are your main takeaways from that part of the engagement? What works? What do you see that you have been able to replicate other places? What would you kind of advice you can give to other people trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, I think first it is spending time, if the client will allow you. I'm at the point, I've been at this for a while, where I just kind of say, this is how it's got to be if you want to work with me kind of thing. It's spending time with those, if it's executive team members, whatever that team is, spending time first with them individually. And it's whatever assessments, indexes people may use. And I've done it with the Kolbe only probably more times than I've done it with the whole passion primer process. But it's one of those things where connecting with people individually, hearing what their challenges and struggles are, and oftentimes their misinterpretations, I think they have about themselves or other people and their intentions, that can be so much explained by talking about the three parts of the mind. And when people bring up their issues and their challenges, and you're able to show them how, is that an attitudinal thing? I mean, you really having personality conflict issues with this person? Or let's look at the Kolbe and be able to say, you just have differences in how you're operating and you're turning into something that it's not. And you can't do that effectively, I don't think. A lot of the Kolbe team building sessions, I don't do any of that until I've worked with the whole team individually. And I have 3 sessions I do with each person before they meet as a group. And I'll tell you what, that goes a long way because, I'm really a strategic planning is what I do. So, doing the assessments and the self-awareness and those types of things for me is the precursor to how we're going to engage in a strategic growth process and the framework and the scenario planning and all these other things I do, because that's a team dialogue and process. And if people aren't going to know what they're coming to the table with, and they aren't going to know how to relate to one another at a deeper level than what they'd have been able to at that point, they felt they needed to hire me because they were stuck, so their real stuckness is in and of themselves and how they're relating and how they're actually understanding their strengths and their talents. And you've got to work through that first, because if you're battling that lack of awareness all along, you're constantly taking, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And my quick start doesn't have the patience for that.
Yeah. I probably should have mentioned at the top of the show, but now seems like a good time to say it, that, well, you, Shelley, and for the audience, Shelley is the 2020 Kolbe Professional Award winner, which is the award for the top Kolbe Certified Consultant. So congratulations again. It's been a year and a half, but
thank you. It was a true honor.
So for all those of you listening, she won it because she's been doing this really well. You didn't win it because you've been doing it really well for a long time. That happens to be true, but it's really, you won it because you just do it really well, and you know how to engage the clients and stick with them. And so changing gears a little bit here, or changing directions, personal applications. Have you done any of that with clients or with friends or yourself? But what kind of non-business ways have you seen Kolbe help people?
Yeah, I mean, so many of my clients, they, wives, children, I've worked with students in schools, teachers, a lot of things that have happened because I do a lot of, in the projects I do, I actually run community development projects, so large real estate development projects and things like that. So through that work in the last 10 years, especially, I've worked with city municipalities and so many people across multiple spectrums. And as soon as people really get it and see it, they're like, hey, do you have time for dinner on, Friday night, and have my kids do the Kolbe and explain it to them because they're getting ready to go to college, or whatever. And so that's just been, that happens monthly, in terms of being able to provide that kind of input.
Now that you mention it, as we're recording this, my daughters are going off to college. They graduate high school tomorrow. So maybe I need to have you talk to them about their Kolbes. They'd probably listen to you better.
Well, maybe, but I am sure, how many dinners? They'd probably roll their eyes, right? Of all the dinners.
They might. They have heard it once or twice before, yes.
Just a couple.
I have to kind of throw this in. Not my daughters, but my son. I was on a trip with my son and my father-in-law and some other guys. And one of the other guys, I don't know really well, and he was asking more about what I do and Kolbe. And, so my son's 21 and he's in college. And, sometimes kids who are 21, they can be, the rolling eyes is what made me think of it. A lot of kids can be like that, like, yeah, whatever, that's my dad talking. And my son actually said to this other guy, like, yeah, I kind of want to be cynical about it because that's just who I am, but I've seen it work too many times and it's really true. And I was like, wow, as a parent, I'm thinking you can't really get a better endorsement than that, because he doesn't really want to endorse it, but he can't help himself. So
no,
crack me up.
And it does, because, even with a lot of my clients' kids and other family members of my own and so forth, it's like, yeah, you tell them about, because you want them to know. It's like, I'm giving you a gift, it's like, you really need to understand this in your life. And it's like, they'll go, yeah, especially some of the younger people. But more times than not, I would say 80% of the time, it'll be 3, 4, 5 years later. And they come back and they're like, you remember when we talked about, or this just happened to me and I'm thinking this is what it is. And yeah, it sticks with people. And I've seen it change people's lives significantly. And even in really bad times, and I don't want to get off on a tangent with this, but my brother right now has been at Cleveland Clinic in ICU for 3.5 weeks now. And it's been a really awful situation. And my parents are both preventative quick starts. My other brother and I have quick start, and you've got 8 doctors coming in and telling you so much information. And my parents' heads spin. They're already emotional about everything that's going on right now. And we know so many people with Kolbe over the years too, that have had really significant, awful family medical issues and other types of things. And when you're thrown into those types of situations, like right now, it's a lifesaver, literally, because I know that if, for my other brother, for example, who's tag teaming with me, he would handle things very differently if I wasn't able to bring it back to a Kolbe discussion about what's going on, with mom and dad. They aren't shutting down. It's the emotional thing. But 2, we've got change every 2 hours. That's significantly. I mean, 1 minute they're amputating his leg and the next minute there's something else going on, and it's awful. And you got to be able to adapt, and yet, know kind of how to put the emotion aside as much as you can, but look at the behaviors of what's really going on in situations like this. And it's truly a game changer. And I think personally, when people really get it and understand it and embrace it and have that language that's a part of them, you see things. I think you see the world completely differently. And it's so ingrained in me and what I do. I mean, yeah, my family members all the time roll their eyes at me, but I don't care because it comes to play too many times, and they say, okay, yeah, I get it.
Well, our prayers are with you and your family. So you're going through all of that. I was going to get back to business stuff to wrap up, but honestly, I think that's kind of a perfect place to end. But, let's focus on the positive of, when you know this stuff about yourself and other people, it can help in difficult situations, but it can also help in those times when you're, not facing something that's as difficult, but achieving those goals, whether that's business or personal. So thanks for all that you do. As and as I hope everybody watching knows, we're really a mission-driven business. We want to help people understand that part of themselves that will really drive their success and help them in difficult times, help them win the championships and, achieve those goals. And you've been a really key part of that for 24 years now. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for having Kolbe and for Kathy and you guys continuing the legacy of it all.
Well, you're welcome. And thanks for being on the show. And we'll talk to you soon again, Shelley, and everybody else. We'll talk to you guys too. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Powered by Instinct. This show is brought to you by Kolbe Corp, a company that helps leaders and organizations thrive using the only instinctive strengths assessment on the market. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Powered by Instinct wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or join us online at kolbe.com/podcast for all the latest episodes.